Um, my name is Angela Tarman, and I'm editor at Arc Publications. And this is my colleague, Tony Ward, the founder and managing editor of Arc. We're talking to you from the very green and at the moment slightly damp Calder Valley in the north of England, which, as you probably know, is the birthplace of Ted Hughes. And this evening we're delighted to be launching our two most recent poetry collections, Time Begins to Hurt by Pippa Little and No Cherry Time by Jennie Feldman. The official publication date of these two books is the 31st of July, but they are available from tonight through the website. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Rachel Lloyd, who manages Arc's social media, and she is going to introduce the poets and to host the rest of the evening. So, Rachel, over to you.
Hello everyone, and thank you for being present tonight to celebrate the publication of our two authors. Just a little side note before we begin, if all of our guests could please put their microphones on mute now. This is just to avoid any background noise or feedback whilst our authors are reading. I have also included in the chat window, which you will see at the bottom, the links to both of the books on our website, which, as Angela said, will be available from tonight onwards to purchase, and you also have the opportunity of getting 10% discount off the books. So yes, if everyone could put their microphones on mute, just to avoid any background noise for our authors. And I'm going to begin by introducing our first poet and her book, No Cherry Time, Jennie Feldman. So I'm going to start with a wonderful blurb on this book by Patrick McGuinness. Jennie Feldman's writing has an exactitude of words to thought, thought to feeling, that makes her poetry entirely her own, fed as it is by so many different cultures and traditions. As a translator and a citizen of the world, she travels between languages, histories and places, but her poetry brings something into English that was not here before. John, I'm so sorry, if you could put your microphone on mute for me. So if you hover your mouse over to the top right corner, you will see an option to mute your... Sorry about this, everyone. Just bear with me. Right, I've had to mute John now. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Jennie, would you like me to repeat that introduction, or would you just like me to...
No, that's fine.
Okay, you take it away, Jennie. Thank you for your patience.
Right, thank you. Well, hello, everyone. It's wonderful that you could join us for this double launch, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Pippa read her work this evening. I want to give very warm thanks to Angela and Tony at Arc for all their hard work and for producing these books so beautifully. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll start with a short poem from Jerusalem. As you will know, if you've spent any length of time in Jerusalem, it's a city of particular intensity, where everything you see seems to be charged with significance, even the trees and the flowers. Like the honeysuckle that greeted me one day when I was out walking, it was past its best and it smelled strongly rather than sweetly, but it still gave off a much needed cheerfulness, bright side, detail. What sweet rot you talk, honeysuckle, flagging on a wall to fruit done blooming. Memories, one by one, being lost, and still your pungent homilies in passing. There's a large, impressive painting of Jerusalem by Edward Lear from 1865, I think, in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And it's a beatific view across the dry valley or wadi of Kidron to the walled old city on its hilltop. You'll find the painting on the top floor of the museum, and I go and look at it from time to time. Room 67. Dogged pilgrim, hooked on the transcendence, up you trudge for the staggered sweep, bedrock declivities, shade gashing the wadi, to that walled trick of light on the ridge. Climb the path, nothing to stop you, from the bottom right-hand corner. Believe in olive trees with no future. Fine lines, craquelure or goat tracks, nearby grazers must have followed. A place now riddled with roads, concrete, contrarieties undreamt, where two robed goat herds, their easy belonging given, archaic, have no time for you. How their sitting rhymes with the slope, blood-red blobs for poppies. Quick swig. This next poem is a short one that I wrote after a particularly dark episode on the news, though actually it could have been written in today's Ukraine or many other parts of the world. Hey shadow, hey shadow, will you let go now? Cherry stain season, all the songs thick booted, falling in. Here come night cats, death on wheels by a whisker mist, has dumped more names in the dark, barely lived in, difficult to pronounce. The last place we lived in Jerusalem, we're now based in the UK, was a neighborhood on the southeast rim of the city, bordering the hills and Palestinian villages of the West Bank. And until recently, there was a cherry orchard that stretched right across the ridge, and it was a place I loved to walk. But coming back there after a few weeks' absence once, it was in the spring, I found that wherever I looked, the trees had been cut down. It was to make way for a construction project, and it said so much. No cherry time. Otherwise lovely, the branches flung in rows you walk. See early spurts of blossom, how bright on the flinty soil. This hillside studded with O's of ochre stumps, giving up, count the rings, their half-score years. How the light hums with the busy chainsaw down where the orchard ends, where last winter's knee-deep snow floored you under a budding sky. And you saw it, the greatest show on earth, umpteen mid-pirouettes il feed, blurring this slope, ecstatic stillness for applause. And now they've dropped, limbs awry. How to forget the dance? Among stray twigs, one stumbling bee looks lost. Wasn't this the spot? Fumbles, staggers, takes off with the bad news to ghost hives under the cypresses. Pick up remnants of old seasons, black as biblical olives, the stalks insisting, cherry, cherry, in your palm, making much of the wrist's brief throbbing, the contrapuntal whistle and flit of migrant warblers in and out of the green's dismembered rustling. This thin air we stand on, where the pit's already plotted, the deadpan concrete. Out of a fold in the hill, a hatted man strides, gives no answer to your greeting. One of you doesn't exist. Stone on stone on stone, the hands, excuse me, that laid this terrace wall long gone to bone. Half wild almonds rooting its base so the world won't slide. To be in no time, clawed out, not flat. Heavy the leaving, crammed pockets clicking with almonds as you walk. A good stone in your hand to crack them. Chew on what we're losing as night comes. Find true north, pinned in a blink, unsinking. How long till the bulbul pipes up, tunes a dawn chortle to perfection, makes nothing of faint rumbles, scrapings, peeping reversals, where a hillside's being shaken out of the dream. This book is made up of 3 parts, and the second and third part come from the UK and from Ireland and Europe. Quite often these days, you meet someone who is physically with you, living among you, but whose heart and soul are really somewhere quite else. Like the Albanian taxi driver I got talking to once. And sea between the land is the literal meaning of Mediterranean. To Oxford Station. Just past All Souls, we veer to high mountains, an accented village pinned by words on the brink. Fierce longing creases his grey stubble. Even in summer, water like ice from the tap, wild figs, plums, strawberries, mountain tea, good for everything, yes, but who doesn't grow old? Next spring, he will go back, or the next. This city already a dot on a speckled island, exile's profile beside me, circling the sea between the lands. Here we are, he says mildly, turns off the meter. In Headington, a suburb of Oxford, there's an old limestone quarry that was once a coral reef in a lagoon. There's a placard there explaining it. And whenever I go there, rather absurdly, I'm gripped by a longing for the Mediterranean, especially Greece, and for a boat. Rock Edge Reserve. Oh, there's an epigraph from the Odyssey. It's Odysseus, and he's asking, whose land have I lit on now? And this place seems to bring out my own inner Odysseus. Call it a day, dear gods, and float me off this reef. It's not in the story, not even at sea. These quarried ridges, corals, shells, gastropods, dryly snag each sailing thought, ankle deep in daisies, poppies, buttercups, saying them out loud to catch the drift, but nothing doing. Must you, dear gods, always clamp the blue and vanished music to my ear? Mighty chunks, moonstruck in nettles and ferns, stuck into walls like tombstones. What if tonight I pour a libation, hoist a sail? Oh, then the scribbled wake as the roads of the world go dark. Sorry. If you've ever been to the archaeological museum in Chania in Crete, you might have noticed a small wheeled toy that was found in a child's tomb. And it was the starting point for this next short poem. Crete. That a child's clay ox, a goggle-eyed pull-along from the afterlife, trails some lost joy behind you. And an anchor tall as two men, puny against the crazed and pocked seaward Byzantine wall, even so props it. That they've nailed in a row cast off doors in the Avraiki quarter. Such things add up as you lean to pull in the shutters. For the last two poems, we'll go to France. Along the left bank of the Seine, there's a street named for the famous writer who died in one of the houses overlooking it. And when I was walking there once, I passed a man who was fishing. Que vaut-elle? Carved in stone, his scowl could be up there with the gargoyles on the Pont Neuf. Crapaud, he growls, reels in a twisting slip of silver, drops it into a bucket and waves me off. Crapaud. Glints from tall windows where the great man took in the scene and died. Heaven lies in a puddle where two pigeons drink head first. The world blinked out, doing it by turns, just in case. Crapaud means toad, and it's one of the more unusual insults that's come my way. And finally, like many people, I love traveling by train. And train travel seems to have a metaphysics all its own, something to do with escape, discovery, revelation even. This poem takes the high-speed TGV from Paris to Marseille. And just before the train reaches its destination, it plunges into a tunnel and then emerges as it arrives. On the TGV. The thing is, the angel murmured, disappearing through that casement, word given, the moment framed, to climb out, find a ticket, hitch on, skim the land due south as it swells on the left, darkly higher to mountains, vineyards combing out, farmsteads in their fields rock-weighted, the loopy Rhone we leap again, past silver blossom on gusted trees, eye socket caves in the ridge, and the river now thinning to shoals, braidings, all but over. And sudden night blinds the life of us deeply, as if no angel, no breath, no climbing ever out. And sky, old blue which art in heaven, back again, cranes in their lofty purpose, and that glitter quite beside ourselves, the sea. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jenny. You read beautifully there. Little emoji applause for you. So I'm going to move to the question section, if that's okay, Jenny.
Certainly.
Thank you. So Edward Lear is a name that turns up more than once in your collection. In addition to the poem about his painting of Jerusalem, there's a series of poems inspired by his imaginary birds. Could you tell us how this series came about, please?
Yes, well, it was that painting of Jerusalem that first alerted me to the fact that there's much more to Edward Lear than the much-loved nonsense poems like The Owl and the Pussycat. I read the excellent biography by Vivian Noakes, which I warmly recommend, and was deeply moved and impressed to learn about the man behind the writing and the painting. To say that he didn't have an easy life would be to put it very mildly. He was the last but one of 21 children. All his life, he struggled with ill health and with depression and loneliness. And yet he created such a wildly imaginative, exuberant, wryly self-deprecating way of communicating with his readers, not just children, but anyone who's known loneliness and isolation. There's a gentle sadness through which his humor shines, and always this wonderful musicality of language. Oh, I also discovered that he traveled quite widely around the Mediterranean, which is how he came to be painting in Jerusalem. I knew that I wanted to write about Edward Lear, and I came across this series that he calls Imaginary Painted Birds. They're done in pen and ink and watercolor. You have the pink bird, the gray bird, the black and white bird, and they have a wonderful, poignant expressiveness to them. And I thought that, by the way, you can find them on the internet if you look for them. I thought that these might be a way of recounting aspects of his life, using quotations from his verse and also slipping into his style with nonsense phrases of my own. It was a lot of fun and quite liberating.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for providing some insight there. So second question, there is very strong visual elements in all of your poems. Does this say something about the creative process at work in your writing?
Well, I'm one of those people who, for better or for worse, tends to think in images. It often happens that something I've seen lodges in my head and insists on being thought through into language. And with luck, that can be the start of a poem, although I never know what direction it's going to take. With the French poet Jacques Derrida, one of the things that attracted me to his writing is its very visual nature. I've translated poems by Jacques Derrida, and it's quite unlike the more abstract mode of expression that you find in much modern French poetry. Also, I've always been intrigued by the cinematic possibilities of writing. There are a couple of poems in this collection that relate to the experience of film. Like a director, you are playing with time and space. You can skip backwards in time and forwards. You can have long shots and close-ups and jump cuts. Crucially, you can choose what to leave out, what not to say or to show. And this allows the reader or viewer to use their own imagination to round out what it is before them, to complete their understanding. And that way they become part of the whole creative enterprise.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for that insight into your work. We are going now to move on to our second author and poet, which is Pippa Little. Time Begins to Hurt. And we begin with a blurb from Esther Morgan. I love this book, its fierce, bright poems with their fierce, bright women. Scattered throughout are lines and images I will carry with me as touchstones, reminders of what makes for good poetry. So many of her poems have a physical, visceral quality which lifts them clean off the page and into your palm. The world of Little's poems is a dark one where the harm, the damage we humans inflict on the environment and on one another is rendered unflinchingly. Love is present too, often inextricably bound up with the pain it can cause, but expressed in such a startling language. It is its own reward. So I introduce Pippa. Will you please read for us?
Thank you, Rachel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Yes, I want to say thank you to Jennie for a beautiful reading, and to Tony and Angela and everybody who's listening and watching. Yes, I'd like to read some poems from this new book, Time Begins to Hurt. And the title is kind of based really on the sort of times that we live in, from a personal level, getting older and things beginning to sort of fall apart and fall off, and joints and things. So a personal bodily element, but also a more wide sort of feeling that we're living in a different conception of time now. We used to think of time as something we had so much of, and it was always an expansion. We would always progress, we would always do better, do more. And I think now with all of this, the pandemic and all of the climate emergency and everything, we've got a different sense of time, that maybe time is more fragile and more scarce. So anyway, that's where I kind of started from with the book. And then of course the pandemic did come, so that changed it all. But this poem is the title poem, so I thought I'd start with that. Time Begins to Hurt. I love how, lying in bed behind yellow curtains under an open window, a dog barks somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog I may know from morning walks or not. And the sound carries, then fades as evening turns towards dark. A door shuts, the dog's gone in, all of us safe in this small place surrounded by beaches under our own rooftops. I love how rain falls in the early hours. Across the street, steady pulse like a runner in plimsolls alone out there. Someone young and fleet making for that door before the key turns, the whole light burns out. Keep running, my heart blurts. You are so near now in your shining skin. Phone wires across the yards begin to warm and thrum in sympathy. I lie with my life, waiting as always for morning on my chair. A shapeless thing, nothing in its pockets. This, as I said, I started this book before the pandemic, and it obviously changed a lot as these events happened. So it was reworked, and I think the central thing was that I lost my lovely husband. Not as a result of COVID, but obviously it was in the middle of lockdown. So this poem is called End of Lockdown, and it was about watching TV and seeing all these people on the beaches, as if nothing had happened, when everybody was allowed to go out again. End of lockdown. Something has been broken in me. Today I walked where rock pools like eyes fill with tears, alone but for gulls and sea glitter. Forbidden touch, skin remembers how to hold and be held in tenderness is holy. The world is very old and very frail. I wonder, will it survive us? Something has been broken. This slow, quiet letting go of our pawnbroker's innocence. I have dreamed again and again of extinction, and yet the world goes on, even as something has lain down in us, like an old animal, come to its end. Multitudes throng the beaches in these last days of lockdown, oiling their glistening legs like flies. a slightly different poem. It's about something from childhood. It's called Burned World. And as a young child, I used to love rubbish dumps and car graveyards and all those forbidden places that children aren't allowed to go, but which fascinate them. And my favorite book was Stig of the Dump. So every time I went somewhere like that, I was always wanting to find my Stig. But this is a poem about that. And I should say that a pan drop is a Scottish mint, in case anybody doesn't know what a pan drop is. So it's called Burned World. Given 4 pan drops, knotted in a hanky, told not to go down the rutted, muddy, fox and tire imprinted track, erased by rain, remade in tellings and retellings of sweet fumes, strange goings on. Of course, we made straight for it, myself and me, our humpbacked shadows a spring uncoiling among the mossy lumber, rats' pillows, dirty plastic, a spread feast where unseen men left what could not catch and torched everything else to char and ashes soft as talc. Once we curled inside a suitcase, our sprung open nest, scorched rapture of narrow squeak, skin of our teeth. One of the things about being older, you realize that older women become increasingly invisible. And this is also quite visible when you go to art galleries. And this is a poem I wrote after I'd been to see an exhibition, and it's a bit of a rant. It's called The Female Etc. The woman in the wire dress, the fruit gum shoes, climbs the gallery stairs, emigrant in her life, surrounded by absent children, husbands, and versions of herself. No cloud of glory, just an unceasing buzzing of white noise, emotional tinnitus. The gallery is cold and pale, the uniformed men bored. She walks a centimetre or 2 above the ground, not enough for anyone to notice. 70% water, 30% rage. She lists in defense 2-sided things. The back of a cinema, secretive and dirty. How dust accrues behind the sideboard. The hungry mirror, the hanged man. How the opposite is always true. I woke myself up, she says, from the labours of twilight sleep. When the lost return, how shall they look? This is a poem which is from a memory really of my son, who was very attached to a beautiful grey horse. And we got to know this horse quite well when he was young, and he rode this horse. And this poem is called Grey Berber. I should say that he had a very posh name. His name was Thor or something, but everybody in the stables just called him Jimmy. So this is for Jimmy. Grey Berber. He thinks he's unobserved in his lonely grace, circling the huge field, fence to fence. He is a running cloud, a fast-flowing river, ripples of mist or smoke. I scent him on the wind. Imagine how the nap rises on his spine. Don't want to bridle or fetter him. Just watch and watch how life loves him whole, muscle and bone. Children seem to bear the brunt of, the violence that we have in the world increasingly more and more. And I wrote this poem for a Palestinian woman called Abitha Ayash, whose 8-year-old son was taken from his neighborhood in West Jerusalem and interrogated for 2 days by the Israeli border force. And this is for her, Abitha Ayash. Coming for our children. You worry for them on the way to school, on the way home, how they have to cross the soldier's path, through the rubble and rough wires, with no hiding places. One afternoon he's late, your 8-year-old son snatched by an armored car. The others ran away, came to tell you. For hours you hardly breathe, don't count. Each bite on your knuckle, each pace across the floor. 15 of them surrounding him. Who is throwing stones? Give us their names. In his 2 big spectacles, his wobbling front teeth, small and skinny. They came for him. Now he never sleeps and trembles the way you tremble. This is called I Was So Old When I Was Not a Woman. I was so old when I was not a woman. People thought my father drank. He never said it was my mother who stuck like moss to dark places. She gives us wipes for the train to wash away the sticky fingerprints of strangers. We descend from Ward 4 in a dark box without him. Street level, says the final sign. He is a crane fly, hurt and folded. He forgets he once walked like other fathers. I can make him strong, afraid of nothing. That's not true. I am ashamed for both of us. The roads have been closed, the railway lines pulled up. We live and die inside these bodies. I was so old when I was not a woman, when I weighed nothing. I just would like to read 2 poems, both of which came from the summer of 2018, both forced migrations, it occurred to me, and both very moving. The first one, Consider the Dirt, is about the migrant caravan who left people who left their homelands in Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, to walk the amazing distance of 2,500 miles to the USA to claim asylum. Started off quite small, but then it became as many as 5,000. And obviously this was, given huge media attention, but it still continues, obviously. And half of the people that the Border Patrol continues to arrest on the US border are unaccompanied children. I should say that descalzados is barefoot and chanclas are flip-flops. And there's a quote from the Bible, Corinthians, in the poem. So I'll read the poem. Consider the dirt. Consider the dirt, for it is a similar color to the soles of our feet when we began in San Pedro Sula on October the 12th, the first 1,000, some walking descalzados or in trainers or chanclas, women with buggies and wheeled cases, children on father's shoulders. Consider the dirt, for it rubs raw, riddles the soft interstices of flesh, the dirt, the earth, the quinta, the terrain, the property, pale in the heat, dark under rain. We have become as the scum of the world, the dregs of all things. You have made us mere offscouring and refuse in the midst of peoples. One foot lifts, pauses while the other presses down. Repeat, repeat, for 30 miles a day. If no trucks take pity, but then sleep where we fall, exhausted on the street. Tomorrow, keep walking. Remembered rooms surprise us now, for the dirt stretches away. Guatemala, Mexico, we could walk to the end of the world with this same grit under our feet. Somebody guards every grain of it, allows us to walk or not. How far? So far. Stop. But we will not stop. The dirt is naked as we are naked, like us is commonplace and plain, and everywhere more plentiful than lilies. So the second poem that's linked to that one because of the time it was written was in the same year, late summer. There was a female orca who, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but it was in the news a lot, who carried her dead newborn over 1,000 miles off the west coast of Canada. And there were lots of television cameras and all sorts of things over the 17 days that this happened, because it was seen as a ritual of grief. Apparently this happens quite a lot, and the underlying cause of it, apart from the grief, is there's an imbalance in the oceans from overfishing now, which means that basically the fish are starving, and that's why they're dying. And this seemed to me like a forced migration too, the fact that this orca had to make this long journey with her dead newborn. So this is called Something is Very Wrong with Us. This fire and flood summer, it oozes out of the earth, dull throb of knowing. In 17 days and nights, orca has carried her newborn dead, photographed, filmed, followed for 1,000 miles. I walk back and forth at the edge of this northern sea, can't leave, can't rest, with no language to say this in any other way. Sea calls, repeats, the harm, the damage. Too lost before this one, which she won't let go, constantly retrieving and lifting its sinking body, pushing against the will of the sea. How her body trembles. I dream of the weight, the cold throat, closing up in silence, again and again. Blood song, blood call, the hurt, the damage. This evening, a report. 6 females circle her, close and slow. She has allowed her young to slip away, fall through the soft layers and threads of the sea. The harm, the damage. I'll just read 2 more poems. The last 2 are both written for my husband, Bob. First one's called Lighthouse and Sea Glass. And I read this at a recent Zoom Carers UK Wellbeing Day. And there were lots of messages came up. And a woman called Dorothy sent me a message, and she put a message up and said, she had lovely words, it was beautiful. And I thought, yes, if I ever have a gravestone, I would like to have that on my gravestone. She had lovely words. So thank you, Dorothy. So I always think of you when I read this poem now. Lighthouse and Sea Glass. A windswept day spent at the tide's seam, diving and wading alone like sanderling or turnstone for sea glass. Home, I arranged my hoard on a high sill west of the lighthouse. Dusk is setting off the beam, slow pulse of there, not there. If you were here, would you tell me how tumuli of spirals turn the lens to a great star told in a rosary by sailors, this long coast? Small tumbled things burn cold against the window. Tell me they will abide. Tell me they will let the young light in, come morning. Sea fissured, fractured smooth, their surfaces seem to fill with tears, mourn lost, uncrossable distance. I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and this is the last poem, The Strangest Happiness, for Bob. The strangest happiness. Though we have no new words for this time of illness, remission, we go by the weight of your hand in mine, the warmth of my hand upon your shoulder. And this is the strangest happiness, no longer expecting anything more than morning glories in the hedgerow, bird song, coffee hot and strong. Some days life feels very much the same this way. Everything simple and separate now. A shaft of sun across the floor. We are in love again and very young and kind with one another. Thank you. It's me.
Thank you, Pippa, for reading so wonderfully. Some very thought-provoking and emotional work there. I also thought it was quite synchronistic that both yourself and Jennie, albeit in very different ways, both had used Jerusalem as a location for some inspiration of your work. So I found that quite interesting and synchronistic. So I'd love to ask you a couple of questions, Pippa, if I can.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Could you tell us about the importance of places and locations in your poems, about your process and how and why a poem gets written in relation to your themes?
Well, place is very important. It's usually the starting point, I think, for many of the poems. Like Jennie, I was really interested in what she was saying about film, and because like her, I'm very interested in film and art, and have a visual imagination really. And I like the idea of sort of juxtaposing elements and writing as a way of kind of controlling what people see and what people don't see, and the so place is something really important to me. I mean, I have lots of different places that mean a lot to me, which I tend to return to when I'm writing. They might be something like the churchyard opposite my house, or Mexico City, where my son lived for a while, and Budapest or Lake Balaton, where good friends live, and we've had many happy memories there. And of course, Scotland, where I grew up, and East Africa, where I was born. So lots of places, usually a lot to do with the sea as well. I think sea and water are very important too.
Yeah, locations hold their own sense of energy, don't they? They're almost like people themselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Pippa. So which poets particularly have been important and or influential to you and the poems that you wrote?
Well, lots of poets. Probably any given day I might say a different one, but I suppose thinking about it over kind of my lifetime, I suppose starting with A.A. Milne, when we were 6 and when we were very small, and those lovely poems, and then being introduced to poems like Adlestrop by my father, and the Love of Language, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and then from there going to university, and then sort of discovering feminist writing, so Adrienne Rich, Denise Levertov, Audre Lorde, and then later on really being drawn to a lot of female poets. I mean, I could rattle off a whole long list, but Frances Horowitz is important to me, and so is Ruth Stone, Jane Hirshfield. And in terms of, I think one of the important things about being a poet is that you learn such a lot from other poets, so that I've been lucky to be part of different workshops and groups, and the University of Newcastle Women's Poet Group. I owe a lot to them, and I love their, I love their poems, so I must give them a mention, because they're all very fine poets. That's Linda Anderson, whose work I love, Anna Woodford, yes, Linda France, of course, Christy Ducker, Cynthia Fuller, yes, Anne Ryland, yes. So, all sorts of poets from all over the place. And of course, I've got the Scottish roots, so anything from Burns to John Burnside and anybody in between. So it's a bit eclectic,
Absolutely eclectic mix.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pippa. Thank you for answering so thoroughly. So that concludes the reading part of the event tonight. Thank you to both of our readers for reading so well, also particularly in the face of some technical difficulties. And thank you to our guests that all kept their microphones on mute as well whilst our authors were reading. I'm just going to have a little check in the chat window. I did receive one question from Jonathan Timbers, who asked a question to Jennie, which was, which poets have influenced you? So similar to Pippa's question there, Jennie, if you wouldn't mind quickly answering that one.
Gosh, I think I could go on for a long time. I mean, let's see. Well, if I just turn around and look at the poets that I have on my shelf here, Geoffrey Hill, Christopher Middleton, they are the two standouts perhaps, but also poets writing in other languages, George Seferis. It's a long list. Yes, they all crowd into my head at the same time now, and I can't pick out the names. But yes, there are many poets that I appreciate and I make discoveries in and find very inspiring.
Yeah, I think over the years as well, you can gain golden nuggets from perhaps something that you've read before, and then it's different the second time you read it, perhaps with distance and time, and then you pick up things that you didn't get from the first occasion. I always think that's quite special.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. So I'm just going to read, we've got some little comment feedback in the chat window here for both of our readers. Thank you to both Jennie and Pippa for 2 rich and moving readings. And that was from Anna Crow and from Joe Clement. Beautiful and incredibly moving readings. Can't wait to read the books. Congratulations, Jennie and Pippa. And Carolyn Yates, lovely words, Jennie and Pippa. Thank you so much. So I'll just open it up to the room for the last 5 minutes. If anyone has any questions for our authors, please type them into the chat window and I will read them out for you. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. If not, like I said earlier, we have links to both books, which can be found on our website, Art Publications, where at the moment you will receive 10% off buying your books for 2 amazing authors, and they will be posted out to you first thing next week. So thank you everyone for being here tonight, and thank you for your patience, our brilliant authors, during some technical difficulties. So I will just wait for a couple of minutes to see if we get any questions in the chat window.
Looks as if he was very shy. Just this.
Pamela Gormley, thank you for a lovely and moving reading. Yeah. So I think that's it. Thank you to everyone that left a comment. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Rachel and Art, for bringing these writers to us from Carolyn Yates. You are welcome, Carolyn.
Okay, perhaps I could say a few words. Just that we're enormously pleased and grateful to have 2 such wonderful poets to read to us this afternoon or this evening. And it shows really the strength of poetry that you get from no other medium. And the 2 poets this evening have been prime examples of poets that not only know their trade and know their disciplines, but are totally humanitarian in their approach, and very welcome they are too. And so all I can say is from ARC Publications, thank you so much for reading to us this evening, and we will long treasure these readings. And thank you, and I hope everybody buys a book really and continues the readings, because they're so wonderful.
Yes, and I hope that the recording of this launch will be up on the ARC YouTube site very soon.
Okay, so with that, we bid you good night and thank you so much for coming to this evening and being entertained by so wonderful manner.
And thank you, Rachel, for handling everything so well. We're not terribly adept at this sort of thing, so we're enormously grateful to you for for managing the evening so well. Thank
Just
you.
think of that, Rachel. We've been plodding along for so many decades, and we still can't do it.
Without help.
So anyway, thank you all so much, and hope to see you again soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Tony and Angela. And for those that missed the event, I will be sharing the link across ARC's social media within the next few days, and you can also share it with other people who would like to see it.
Good.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.